A bakery in occupied Jersey. The scent of fresh bread masking something far darker. Between 1940 and 1945, 19 high-ranking Nazi supply officers disappeared without trace from this single location. The Germans blamed resistance fighters, saboteurs, even Allied commandos. They never suspected the humble baker who served them daily. His weapon wasn't a rifle or explosive, it was patience, precision, and an oven that concealed the deadliest trap the Channel Islands ever knew. Jersey, Channel Islands. 1st July 1940, 06:47 hours. The acrid stench of diesel fuel mixed with salt air as German boots echoed through St. Helier's cobblestone streets. Thomas Corbett stood motionless behind his bakery counter, flour dust settling on his trembling hands as he watched Wehrmacht officers requisition his neighbor's shop. The temperature had dropped overnight to 14 degrees, unusually cold for summer, and the chill now seemed to seep through the island's limestone foundations, through every brick of every building, into every British heart that refused to accept occupation. The Channel Islands were Britain's only occupied territories. When the Germans arrived, they brought with them an apparatus of control so efficient, so methodical, that resistance seemed futile. Jersey became a strategic waypoint for Nazi supply operations, running between occupied France and the Atlantic Wall fortifications. Every week, supply commanders rotated through the island, coordinating shipments of ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, and rations destined for German garrisons across the Western Front. The strategic situation was brutally clear. Britain stood alone, her troops evacuated from Dunkirk, her cities burning under Luftwaffe bombardment. The Channel Islands, abandoned without defense, now served as enemy territory just 12 miles from the French coast. Intelligence reports indicated that if supply lines through Jersey remained uninterrupted, German forces could sustain their Atlantic defenses indefinitely. Yet conventional sabotage proved impossible. The Germans had implemented a system of collective punishment. Any act of resistance meant 10 civilians executed in reprisal. Thomas Corbett was 43 years old, born and raised in St. Helier, a third-generation baker whose family had supplied the island's bread since 1847. His wife Margaret died during childbirth in 1938. His daughter Eleanor, now 12, was evacuated to England just before occupation. He worked alone now, maintaining the bakery not from profit, but from stubborn refusal to let occupation extinguish what his grandfather built. His vulnerability was absolute. A civilian with no military training, no weapons, no network of fellow conspirators. But he possessed something the Germans underestimated: intimate knowledge of his building's architecture and an understanding of their predictable routines. The crisis point arrived on 15th of August 1940. Corbett witnessed a scene that would haunt him forever. 3 Jersey fishermen were executed in the town square for allegedly supplying intelligence to British forces. The men were innocent. Corbett knew them personally, but the Germans needed examples. As bodies were dragged away, Oberst Klaus Richter, the senior supply coordinator, stood smoking a cigarette outside Corbett's bakery, entirely indifferent to the murder just committed. He commented to his adjutant, in German he assumed no one understood, "These islanders are cattle. They'll work and breed and die, and we'll barely notice." Corbett understood every word. His grandmother was German. He'd learned the language as a child. That moment crystallized his resolve. He couldn't fight with weapons. He couldn't organize resistance without endangering innocence. But he could use what the Germans themselves gave him: their arrogance, their routines, their appetite for fresh bread that drew them to his shop daily. His bakery possessed a unique architectural feature. During the Victorian era, his grandfather had installed a secondary brick oven in the cellar for large-scale production. By 1940, this oven was obsolete, its chimney sealed, its iron door rusted shut. But the cellar itself connected to a network of medieval smugglers' tunnels running beneath St. Helier's old quarter. Tunnels the Germans knew nothing about because pre-war municipal records were hidden before occupation. The plan formed slowly, carefully, over weeks of observation. German supply officers rotated through Jersey every 14 days. They followed identical patterns, arriving Tuesday morning, conducting inspections, then requisitioning supplies before returning to France on Friday. During their stay, senior officers invariably visited Corbett's bakery Wednesday afternoon for fresh bread, drawn by reputation that transcended occupation. They came alone or in pairs, never with subordinates, considering the errand beneath their rank to share. Corbett's strategy required patience that bordered on madness. He would serve them, observe them, learn their habits. Then, when conditions aligned perfectly, when a visiting officer came alone, when street traffic was minimal, when weather provided cover, he would act. The mechanism was simple but irreversible. Lure the target to the cellar under pretense of showing premium reserves, then use the element of surprise to incapacitate and dispose of them through the tunnels leading to the harbor, where bodies could disappear into the tide. The ethical calculation was stark. Every German supply officer he eliminated meant disruption to logistics networks supporting occupation forces. Intelligence suggested each commander coordinated shipments worth hundreds of thousands of pounds sterling, supplies that sustained soldiers fighting against British forces in North Africa, the Mediterranean, eventually the Eastern Front. Removed 19 commanders over 5 years, and the cumulative disruption could save Allied lives numbering in the thousands. But Corbett understood the personal cost. This wasn't warfare conducted at distance with honor codes. This was cold, calculated murder repeated 19 times, requiring him to look men in the eyes before killing them. He would have to live with that forever. Yet the alternative, watching his island serve as accomplice to Nazi aggression while doing nothing, seemed more unbearable. His decision was made on 22 August 1940, when Hauptmann Ernst Vogel visited his bakery alone, commenting how charming Jersey was, how he'd considered retiring here after the war. Corbett served him bread, chatted pleasantly in broken German, then mentioned special reserves stored in the cellar. Vogel followed him down the stone steps, and in that dim space, surrounded by flour sacks and silent ovens, the baker's trap was sprung for the first time. The deed was done, and there would be 18 more. The physical reality of Corbett's operation existed in conditions of perpetual terror, masked by everyday normalcy. His bakery operated from 4 sites each morning, the ovens fired with coal increasingly rationed by German authorities. By September 1940, he received barely enough fuel to maintain production, forcing him to mix sawdust into bread dough to extend supplies. A common practice across occupied Europe, the workshop temperature fluctuated wildly, scorching near the ovens, freezing in the cellar. His hands, once smooth from years of kneading dough, became scarred with burns and cuts from work conducted in near darkness during blackout hours. The operational environment demanded absolute precision under impossible constraints. Jersey's occupation meant constant surveillance. German patrols circulated through St. Helier on irregular schedules, their boots hammering cobblestones at unpredictable intervals. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights crossed the island daily, photographing infrastructure changes. The Feldgendarmerie maintained an office 3 streets from Corbett's bakery, its personnel conducting random inspections of civilian premises. Any suspicious behavior, unexplained absences, unusual purchases, patterns deviating from established routine, triggered interrogation. The technical challenges were formidable. Corbett possessed no formal training in close-quarters combat. His only advantage was surprise and intimate knowledge of his building's architecture. The cellar steps descended at a steep angle, requiring targets to watch their footing. The ceiling was low, just 6 feet 2 inches, forcing taller Germans to duck. The lighting consisted of a single paraffin lamp, easily positioned to blind targets at critical moments. The medieval tunnels behind the sealed oven required precise navigation through pitch-black passages just 30 inches wide, flooded with harbor tidal water during high tide cycles. The human challenges were even more brutal. Corbett worked entirely alone. He couldn't confide in anyone, not fellow islanders, not resistance contacts, not even his daughter through smuggled letters to England. The psychological isolation was absolute. Each operation required him to maintain perfect composure before, during, and after. He served German customers daily, making conversation, laughing at their jokes, all while knowing he'd murdered their predecessors. The cognitive dissonance was crushing. Some nights he woke gasping, convinced the Gestapo was breaking down his door. He developed a tremor in his left hand that persisted for years. The environmental obstacles compounded everything. Channel Islands' weather was notoriously unpredictable, brilliant sunshine transforming to torrential rain within minutes. Autumn 1940 brought storms that flooded the tunnels, forcing Corbett to wait weeks between operations. Winter arrived with freezing temperatures that cracked the bakery's ancient plumbing, creating leaks that threatened to expose the cellar's modifications. Spring 1941 saw German engineers conducting structural surveys of St. Helier buildings, barely missing the concealed tunnel entrance behind false brickwork Corbett installed. The supply officers themselves varied dramatically. Some were career Wehrmacht professionals, efficient and cold. Others were middle-aged reservists, clerks and accountants in uniform who spoke wistfully of families back in Hamburg or Munich. Corbett learned to compartmentalize. He couldn't afford sympathy. Each target represented logistical capability, supporting forces killing British soldiers. The youngest was 29, the oldest 56. All were complicit in occupation machinery. The disposal method required meticulous timing. Bodies had to reach the harbour during high tide, when swift currents carried them out to sea. Corbett mapped tidal schedules obsessively, cross-referencing with moon phases affecting water levels. The tunnel journey took 14 minutes at forced pace, dragging dead weight through claustrophobic darkness while water rose around his knees. Twice he nearly drowned when unexpected tides surged faster than predicted. Once, returning to the bakery, he encountered a German patrol and had to maintain casual conversation for 5 minutes while soaked to his waist, claiming he'd been repairing a burst pipe. His resilience manifested in small, defiant acts that maintained sanity. He continued the British tradition of afternoon tea, rationed though it was, brewing precious leaves while listening to BBC broadcasts on a hidden wireless. He kept his grandfather's Union Jack folded beneath floorboards, removing it occasionally just to remember what he fought for. When German officers praised his bread, he smiled and thanked them while mentally reciting Churchill's speeches memorized from forbidden radio transmissions. The operational phases proceeded with agonizing slowness. September to December 1940 saw 4 successful operations: Vogel, Bauer, Schneider and Hoffmann. Each required weeks of reconnaissance, observing patterns, identifying isolated targets, waiting for weather and tidal conditions to align. January to May 1941 added 3 more: Kruger, Dietrich and Zimmermann. By June 1941, German authorities noticed a statistical anomaly. 7 supply officers assigned to Jersey had disappeared without trace. They launched an investigation, interrogating islanders, searching buildings, examining records. Corbett's bakery was inspected twice. Both times, investigators found nothing. The medieval tunnels remained undiscovered, the cellar's modifications undetected, the baker himself above suspicion because he seemed too ordinary, too compliant, too harmless. The breakthrough came from luck as much as skill. When investigators asked if he'd noticed anything unusual, Corbett mentioned seeing suspicious activity near the harbour late at night, entirely fabricated but pointing away from his bakery. The Germans, convinced saboteurs were operating from coastal areas, redirected resources. Corbett continued his work. By December 1941, the tally stood at 12. By June 1943, 17. The final 2 were eliminated in autumn 1944, just months before liberation. Throughout it all, Corbett maintained the mask. His neighbors saw him as a quiet, dutiful baker who'd adapted to occupation with resignation. German customers considered him a reliable supplier, perhaps overly obsequious but harmless. No one suspected that behind his flour-dusted apron and tired smile operated a mind of ruthless calculation, executing a silent war that would alter Jersey's strategic significance far beyond anything conventional resistance could achieve. The anomaly first appeared in Wehrmacht logistics reports during January 1941, buried within statistical summaries that should have been routine. Oberkommando der Wehrmacht headquarters in Berlin received a memorandum from Jersey's garrison commander noting irregular personnel rotation among supply coordination staff. The language was bureaucratic and vague, typical of officers reluctant to admit problems within their command. But the numbers were undeniable. 7 officers assigned to the Channel Islands posting had failed to complete their rotation cycles. They'd simply vanished. German military doctrine did not accommodate such irregularities. The Wehrmacht prided itself on systematic efficiency that made their operational tempo superior to adversaries. Supply chain management was a science perfected through years of meticulous planning. Officers didn't disappear. Equipment might be lost to enemy action. Installations might be sabotaged, but personnel, particularly senior logistics coordinators, operated within controlled environments with documented movements and predictable rotations. The Jersey disappearances violated every protocol. Initial German assumptions followed predictable patterns shaped by doctrinal rigidity. The first hypothesis suggested desertion. Perhaps officers, disillusioned with occupation duty or anticipating Germany's increasingly problematic strategic position after failing to invade Britain, had escaped to neutral countries. This theory collapsed under investigation. Missing officers' personal effects remained in their quarters. Financial records showed no suspicious transactions. Families in Germany reported no contact. Men who deserted didn't leave behind wedding rings, photographs of children, and personal journals. The second hypothesis proposed Allied commando operations. British Special Operations Executive was known to conduct raids on occupied territories. Perhaps Jersey had become a target for systematic assassination of logistics personnel. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, deployed resources investigating this possibility. They analyzed patterns, searching for evidence of covert insertion, unexplained boat movements, civilian informants, clandestine radio transmissions. Nothing substantial emerged. Jersey's small size made infiltration exceptionally difficult. The garrison maintained tight coastal surveillance. The island's civilian population was thoroughly monitored. How could Allied commandos operate repeatedly, targeting specific individuals without leaving any trace? The third hypothesis suggested local resistance networks. Despite collective punishment policies deterring open rebellion, perhaps underground cells had organized systematic operations against German personnel. Interrogations intensified. The Gestapo arrested suspected resistance members, conducting enhanced questioning that revealed genuine resistance activities, underground newspapers, hidden wireless sets, minor acts of sabotage, but nothing suggesting capability for coordinated assassination of supply officers. The resistance networks that existed were fragile, poorly equipped, focused on survival rather than offensive operations. German intelligence officers became genuinely perplexed. Hauptsturmführer Otto Brenner, a Gestapo investigator dispatched from Paris in March 1942, spent 6 weeks examining every disappearance. His final report, preserved in archives, reveals cognitive dissonance bordering on desperation. Brenner acknowledged the statistical impossibility of his findings. 19 senior officers vanishing from a heavily garrisoned island measuring just 9 miles by 5, with no bodies recovered, no witnesses identified, no forensic evidence discovered. His conclusion suggested unprecedented security failure, requiring fundamental operational reassessment, language that essentially admitted defeat without explicitly stating so. The perplexity stemmed from cultural and doctrinal blind spots intrinsic to German military thinking. Wehrmacht commanders underestimated civilian populations, viewing them as passive administrative problems rather than potential threats. The concept that a solitary baker, a civilian with no military training, no sophisticated equipment, no organizational support, could systematically eliminate 19 officers seemed literally inconceivable. Their operational philosophy presumed that meaningful resistance required infrastructure, networks, weapons, communications, training. The idea that improvisation, patience, and intimate local knowledge could achieve what entire commando units struggled to accomplish violated their fundamental assumptions about warfare's nature. The first documented moment of German confusion occurred when Oberstleutnant Friedrich Hartmann disappeared in April 1942. Hartmann was exceptionally security conscious, having survived a Soviet partisan ambush on the Eastern Front. He traveled with sidearm always accessible, maintained situational awareness, avoided predictable patterns, yet he vanished Wednesday afternoon after mentioning to his adjutant he was purchasing bread before their Friday departure. His body was never found. German investigators searched the bakery, questioned Corbett extensively, found nothing suspicious. The official file concluded Hartmann's disappearance was unexplained, likely connected to previous incidents, origin unknown. Intelligence analysts in Berlin reviewed Jersey posting assignments, noting the pattern. Officers disappeared during their Wednesday afternoon free periods, typically their third day on the island. This suggested targeting based on routine observation. But who was observing? How were they selecting targets? Where were bodies concealed? The Channel Islands had limited hiding places. Systematic searches of buildings, beaches, and countryside revealed nothing. It was as though men were simply erased from existence. The final German recognition of operational impossibility came in September 1944, 2 months before Jersey's liberation. By then, 19 officers had vanished across 4 years. A Wehrmacht after-action report, stamped Geheim, secret, acknowledged the Jersey anomaly represented effective enemy action through unknown methodology. The report recommended discontinuing Jersey as a supply coordination hub, rerouting operations through French mainland facilities despite increased Allied air interdiction risks. Essentially, the Germans admitted defeat against an enemy they never identified, couldn't understand, and failed to counter. The tragic irony was that dozens of Germans passed Corbett's bakery daily, purchasing bread from the man who'd killed their colleagues, never suspecting because they couldn't conceive such possibility. Their arrogance, the presumption that warfare required visible infrastructure, that civilians were harmless, that British resistance was limited to commando raids and aerial bombardment, blinded them to reality operating beneath their noses. Thomas Corbett, the humble baker with flour-dusted hands and a tired smile, represented something their doctrine couldn't accommodate. Individual determination weaponized through patience and precision, more effective than entire resistance networks because it operated outside every assumption their training had instilled. 9th May 1945. Liberation. British forces returned to Jersey, accompanied by delirious celebrations that transformed St. Helier into a spontaneous festival of Union Jacks and champagne, saved for 5 years. Thomas Corbett stood outside his bakery, watching crowds surge through streets that had known only occupation since he'd begun his silent campaign. The relief was existential, not merely victory, but validation that survival itself had been worthwhile. Children who'd been toddlers in 1940 now danced in streets, having known nothing but German rule until this moment. The weight of what he'd done, 19 lives taken, 5 years of deception maintained, suddenly became real in ways isolation had prevented him from processing. The immediate post-war accounting revealed impacts Corbett himself hadn't fully grasped. British intelligence officers debriefed him over 3 weeks of intensive interviews, reconstructing his operations with meticulous detail. The strategic analysis proved remarkable. Each supply officer he'd eliminated represented average coordination of $250,000 sterling in monthly logistical throughput, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, rations. 19 officers killed meant, conservatively, disruption of $4.75 million in supplies over 5 years. More significantly, German documentation captured after liberation showed Jersey's relegation from primary to secondary supply hub in late 1944 resulted directly from the unexplained disappearances. This forced rerouting through mainland facilities more vulnerable to Allied air interdiction, contributing to accelerated deterioration of Atlantic Wall defensive capacity. The human calculus was starker. Military historians later estimated that sustained supply line disruption in Jersey sector contributed to German forces' inability to reinforce Normandy defenses during D-Day's critical weeks. While impossible to quantify precisely, analysts suggested Corbett's actions may have saved Allied lives, numbering in the low thousands, by degrading enemy logistical efficiency at crucial moments. One man, working alone with no weapons beyond patience and knowledge of medieval architecture, had achieved strategic impact comparable to commando units operating with vastly greater resources. But the psychological cost was immense. Corbett never fully reconciled what he'd become. He'd killed 19 men, most at close quarters, all through deliberate premeditation. Some were career soldiers committed to Nazi ideology. Others were conscripts and logisticians who'd likely have preferred peaceful lives. He remembered their faces, their voices, their final moments. The nightmares persisted for decades, not from guilt precisely, but from the existential weight of having repeatedly chosen to end lives, however justified, by strategic necessity. Post-war recognition arrived slowly and incompletely. The British government, valuing intelligence operational security, initially classified Corbett's actions. He received no public acknowledgement, no medals, no commemorations. Officially, the German disappearances remained under investigation. Churchill's government feared publicity might compromise other covert networks still operating in formerly occupied territories. Corbett returned to baking, saying nothing, watching as decorated military heroes received accolades while his contribution remained invisible. His personal life reflected warfare's lingering costs. His daughter Eleanor, evacuated in 1939, returned in 1946, aged 18. They'd been separated for 7 critical years. Rebuilding that relationship proved agonizing. She'd become an adult while he'd become something he struggled to articulate. He never told her the truth, couldn't bear to share that burden. They remained cordial but distant. She moved to London in 1948, married, had children he rarely saw. The war had saved the nation but cost him his family. The partial recognition came in 1972, when declassification protocols released wartime intelligence documents. A researcher studying Channel Islands' occupation discovered Corbett's operational file and contacted the Times. The story broke slowly, initially met with skepticism. A baker who'd killed 19 Germans sounded like sensational fiction, but documents authenticated the account. Corbett, now 75, granted a single interview. He spoke with characteristic understatement. "Someone had to do something. I had the opportunity, so I did it." Public reaction divided sharply along generational lines. Veterans who'd fought in North Africa, Italy, Normandy understood immediately. They'd known the critical importance of logistics, how supply disruptions could determine battles as decisively as firepower. They recognized Corbett's contribution as legitimate warfare conducted through unconventional means. Younger Britons, removed from wartime context, found the story disturbing. Summary executions conducted without trial, without formal military sanction, seemingly at odds with British values of fair play and justice. Historians who studied the Jersey operations emphasized several transformative lessons. First, warfare's nature was far broader than conventional combat. Strategic impact could emerge from actions completely outside traditional military frameworks. A civilian operating alone could achieve results entire battalions struggled to replicate, provided they possessed opportunity, knowledge, and determination. Second, the power of sustained patience. Corbett's campaign lasted 5 years, each operation separated by weeks or months. Immediate results were invisible. Cumulative impact was substantial. Third, the importance of cultural and geographical knowledge. His success derived entirely from intimate understanding of Jersey's architecture, tidal patterns, German routines, and occupation psychology. The operational legacy influenced post-war British intelligence doctrine significantly. Special Operations Executive's post-war analysis incorporated lessons from Corbett's success, emphasizing individual initiative, long-term patience, and exploitation of adversary blind spots. His methodology, patient observation, pattern recognition, exploitation of routine predictability, became foundational concepts in Cold War intelligence training. Thomas Corbett died on 14th of March 1987, aged 90. His funeral in St. Helier attracted surprisingly large attendance. Veterans who'd researched his story, historians documenting occupation resistance, islanders who remembered him simply as their baker. A modest plaque was installed outside his former bakery. Thomas Corbett, 1897-1987. Baker, patriot. In his own way, he resisted. The final assessment of his life required confronting uncomfortable truths. He'd killed 19 men through calculated deception, actions that under peacetime law would constitute serial murder. Yet context transformed meaning. Occupation represented existential threat, demanding responses that transcended peacetime morality. Corbett's contribution proved something fundamental about British character that the war repeatedly validated. When faced with apparently impossible circumstances, ordinary people could do extraordinary things, not through theatrical heroism, but through quiet determination sustained over years, through willingness to bear psychological costs that victory demanded, through refusal to accept defeat even when conventional resistance seemed futile. His legacy endured not in monuments or medals, but in the memory that Jersey's occupation, while brutal, hadn't been accepted passively. One man, with flour-dusted hands and a trap concealed within medieval walls, had proven that resistance could emerge from unexpected places, that strategic impact wasn't exclusive to armies and admirals, that sometimes history's most consequential battles occurred in cellars and tunnels, far from traditional battlefields. Thomas Corbett embodied the unglamorous reality that winning wars required not just soldiers on front lines, but civilians willing to wage silent campaigns whose full impact might never be understood or acknowledged. He did what the moment demanded, paid the psychological price that such choices exacted, and demonstrated that even in darkness of occupation, the British spirit remained fundamentally unbroken. If this story of quiet courage resonated with you, please do subscribe to our channel for more untold accounts from the Second World War. We uncover the extraordinary contributions of ordinary Britons who shaped history through determination and ingenuity. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Did you know about Jersey's hidden resistance? What other wartime stories deserve recognition? Ring the bell for notifications. Cheers, and we'll see you in the next one.